focusing too much on details. Misreading information and, of course, inadequate vocabulary. A lot of kids that are tested for dyslexia by 4th grade and on for the first time appear to have low vocabulary, and we say, well, that's what's wrong with his comprehension. Well, he didn't have low vocabulary in 1st grade. He just hasn't read enough to be exposed enough to good vocabulary, and now his vocabulary looks poor. Adults often have difficulty planning, organizing, managing time, materials, and tasks, often work well below their intellectual capacity. Nevertheless, the dyslexic brain is my favorite kind of brain. So many of them persevere anyway. Because they are often spatially talented, their professions often include engineers, architects, designers, artists, craftspeople. I love this one, mathematics, physicians, especially surgeons and orthopedists and dentists. You would be surprised at how many brain surgeons couldn't read their textbook very well, and they're very talented. It's amazing. They're intuitive, good at reading people, and they're entrepreneurs. If somebody won't hire them to do the job they want to do, they'll create it themselves. So, back to the ultimate consequences of not identifying a dyslexic. Diminished self-esteem, they become undereducated, and all too often underemployed. Societal consequences, 70 to 80% of special education students have deficits in reading. 36% of students with learning disabilities drop out of high school. 59% of prison inmates are dyslexic. 70% of students nationwide never attain reading proficiency. So here's where learning about the dyslexic can help 70% of our students. That's because reading is on a continuum. We have weak readers all the way to strong readers. The weakest are considered dyslexic. 20% of all students require little to no formal education to learn how to read. A lot of people, 20% of people, are learning how to read when they are 4 years old and by no benefit of having any formal instruction. Just because they have an older sister and their mom reads signs when they drive by them and they start to pick this stuff up. The continuum progresses, however, to the dyslexic. 20% of students require highly structured, sequentially organized, multisensory and phonics-based reading instruction. So you figure it's not just the dyslexics who need this. This guy over here at 21% needs it too. They need it less the farther they go in this direction. But if 70% of our students are not reading at their full potential, I'm going to say 70% of our students need this to some degree, more the farther you go. So by learning how to teach the dyslexic how to read, our entire nation will be more proficient in life. I think that's the end of my stuff. Yes.
While Carolyn was talking about the continuum, I think it's one of the things that makes dyslexia the absolutely most difficult word to understand because it does fall on a continuum. We know that 1 to 5% of individuals are severely dyslexic, but up to 15 to 20% have enough symptoms of dyslexia that they need to be taught in a specific manner. And speaking of societal consequences, and the dropout rate around kids who can't read, I'm really excited that our center has had a few visits, and we are going in with such open arms from the Spring Creek Juvenile Center in Colorado Springs, where they have over 100 youth who have been committed for what I hear are some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. And we're actually starting testing on Thursday, but we have found out that these kids are probably, I can't remember the youngest, I want to think about 6th grade, but they go up through transition because some of them get their, they're committed right as they're going into their senior year, so they're actually there until they're 20 or 21. Average reading level of these kids is 4th grade. So we do have significant societal consequences. A child who finishes second grade without being able to read has only a 1 in 4 chance of reading at grade level by the end of elementary school. That's a pretty strong statistic. By receiving help early in kindergarten or first grade, that same child has a 90 to 95% chance of becoming a fluent reader. And when I came out of my first meeting at this juvenile center, it made me more passionate than ever to get the help to our teachers in the early grades, because I guarantee you there are a few kids who are committed right now that wouldn't have been if they had been given instruction early enough on. This is a statistic I got from the National Institutes of Health. And what's really interesting about this, it's a graph of the percent of fourth grade students performing below basic level. The scary thing about this graph is it hasn't changed in over 20 years. 20 years ago, 38% of fourth grade students nationwide were reading below basic level. Well, what did we not have 20 years ago that we've had in the past 20 years? Technology, what else? What's been coming out of Washington, etc.? No Child Left Behind, Reading First, all of these great, great initiatives. And despite all of these laws, we still have not pulled the reading scores up in over 20 years. We have closed the gap somewhat. I don't know if you can read these over here: white, black, Hispanic, poor, non-poor. We've closed the gap somewhat between the different groups, but overall, we still have 37% of kids in fourth grade not reading at grade level. 10 in 100 children struggle with dyslexia, and 3 to 5% of this population are severely affected by dyslexia to a point of a life disability. I've had the opportunity to work with adults before. Have any of you ever worked with adults who can't read? It's touching, isn't it touching? One of my first experiences, I was on the board of literacy instruction for Texas, and what they were using with these adult classes were tapes. And I volunteered to take a woman's spot when she went on vacation. And one of my first sessions, it was 9 to 12, and I didn't use the tape. I just taught them because that's what my training is. Well, we finished at 11:45, and I said, "You're going to get out early for lunch today, aren't you excited?" And they said, no, we've got 15 more minutes. The dignity that it gives them to be able to do something that has made them feel like a misfit is just remarkable. If any of you ever have a chance, I would encourage you to work with adults. Dyslexia, a learning disability, affects males and females nearly equally, and people from different ethnic and socioeconomic backgrounds as well. Dyslexia knows no barriers. I know that some people think that in their neighborhoods or in their schools, they're not going to have a problem with dyslexia because their parents are teachers and doctors and lawyers, etc. Dyslexia really doesn't care. I'm going to talk a little bit about the laws. I moved here in 1999 from Texas, and you might hear a little bit of a twang still there. I got into this field because of my oldest child. When I learned he was dyslexic, I went back to school just to learn how he learned. Good thing I did, because 3 of my 4 are dyslexic. But I was in the field in Dallas training teachers at Southern Methodist University, and we moved to Colorado, and I was shocked because Colorado didn't have dyslexia. I wasn't sure what I was going to do for a while. But meanwhile, a few years ago, thankfully, our state changed our terminology. And we are aligned now with what the federal government and what most other states use. And we have adopted a definition directly from IDEA 2004. And bear with me, but we do need to read through this. The term specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, which may manifest itself in imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. This term includes such conditions as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, here it is right here, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. Such term does not include a learning problem that is primarily the result of visual, hearing, or motor disabilities, of mental retardation, of emotional disturbance, or of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. Specific learning disabilities is an identifiable category of disability in IDEA 2004, as well as in the Colorado Law Exceptional Children's Education Act. So the next part of this may sound familiar. This category was previously referred to in Colorado law as perceptual communicative disabilities. We're going to breeze through reading development and what we expect to see in an average child. All individuals, in order to read, must go through the same steps of reading development. Those of you who are teachers have had this in school at some point. What happens with our kids is they don't go through things at the same stages. So we're just going to go through this very quickly. Jean Chall, who's heard that name, gave us the 6 stages of reading. Stage 0 is pre-reading or pseudo-reading, which generally is birth to age 6, where oral language development is taking place. I will point out, and Carolyn pointed out earlier when someone asked about early identification, sometimes speech pathologists are the first to identify children who ultimately might be diagnosed with dyslexia. There are a few disorders that are highly comorbid with dyslexia, and one are speech-language impairments. Speech delays, language impairments. The other is ADHD. And I will just throw this in at this point. Approximately 30% of all students with dyslexia also have ADHD. So they're highly comorbid. They're very different. One of the important things that we have to do in testing is to tease apart, is it dyslexia? Is it an attention problem? Or is the child dealing with both? Anyway, oral language development, stage 0. Stage 1, initial reading. This is when they're starting school and they're learning that letters represent sounds, and they're getting the sound symbol correspondences and spelling patterns. Stage 2, confirmation and fluency, learning to read. Generally, grades 2 and 3. They're learning decoding, fluency, reading strategies, and then guess what happens around the 4th grade? They flip from learning to read to reading to learn. Expand vocabularies. Up until this point, their vocabularies have come primarily from the world around them. Grade 4, those students who are reading are increasing their vocabularies tremendously through their reading. Carolyn, I hadn't heard that statistic before about an elementary book having more rare words than expert testimony. But so you can see the importance of reading. And just to look at the next few, multiple viewpoints, ages 14 through 18, and they're just getting more and more sophisticated with their reading. And stage 5, construct understanding based on analysis and synthesis. We see that if we don't get our dyslexics beyond those early years, they're never going to be able to move to these levels of reading. This is a graph that was created by Seidlenberg and McClellan years and years ago. Marilyn Yeager Adams took it and put it in her book, Beginning to Read. And this latest, nice, colorful version is from Louisa Moats and Letters. Are some of you familiar with Letters? Anyway, there are 4 processors in the brain that lead to reading. We have the phonological processor, which deals with nothing but sounds. No symbols here whatsoever. The orthographic processor, which has to do with what we see, symbols, images. Then we have the meaning processor and the context processor. We hear a lot today about what the phonological processor does when we